The affluent CEO was leisurely enjoying his coffee in his office when a little girl's frantic scream echoed outside his door, bringing the entire building to a standstill, leaving him in a state of bewilderment that altered the course of his life. Charles Bennett commenced his day as he typically did, early, precise, and undisturbed. The skyline spread wide outside his 34th floor office window, painted in golden tones by the rising sun. His assistant had already delivered his customary double espresso. His tie was flawlessly arranged, and the financial report on his tablet shone with impeccable figures. It was a pattern Charles depended on, a daily framework that maintained his life orderly, polished, and entirely under his command. The moment a high-pitched scream sliced through the stillness outside his office, that control disintegrated. He glanced upward at once, a frown creasing his brow, uncertain whether the sound he perceived was genuine. A second scream pierced the air, clearly the voice of a child. The sound reverberated through the marble-clad hallway just outside his office door. Charles rose and approached the source of the noise. Upon opening the door, he encountered a scene that seemed almost dreamlike. A security guard stood in the reception area, firmly holding onto a small girl who was wriggling in his grip. She appeared to be no older than 6. Her wavy blonde hair tumbled around her round face in a chaotic manner, while her large brown eyes were filled with a sense of urgency. Her tiny fists were tightly clenched, her voice raspy from the intensity of her shouting. "Please, allow me to leave. I must speak with him," she exclaimed, struggling to break free. The guard caught sight of Charles and wore an expression of regret. "Excuse me, sir." She hurried past the front desk. "She claims to know you. I was merely guiding her out." The girl noticed Charles and instantly ceased her resistance. Her eyes met his, and she became still, as though the world around them had come to a halt. Her lower lip quivered. "You're Mr. Bennett," she murmured, her voice barely above a whisper, as if she had just crossed the finish line of a long, exhausting race. Charles moved in, his confusion lingering. "Indeed, I am. May I ask who you are?" The girl gulped and cautiously advanced a step. "My name is Ellie. My mommy is in the hospital," she said. "If anything ever happened, I should come find you." Her voice trembled on the last word as she rummaged through the backpack slung over one shoulder, retrieving a folded photograph. Her hands trembled as she passed it to him. Charles opened the photo, and an unsettling calm washed over him. There he was, a decade younger, with his arm around a woman he hadn't encountered in 6 years. Julia. She wore a smile, and he mirrored it, both captured in a fleeting instant that seemed to belong to another era. Charles lifted his gaze from the photograph, a realization dawning upon him as he recognized the similarity in Ellie's eyes, the contour of her lips. His heart pounded a single, forceful beat. "My mom is Julia," Ellie murmured, her voice softening to a near whisper. "She mentioned that if she was unable to speak, I should reach out to you. She mentioned that you would be of assistance. Please, please don't send me away." The security guard glanced at Charles for guidance, clearly unsure of what to do. Charles found himself momentarily at a loss for words. His throat felt parched. He gazed at Ellie once more and perceived an unexpected quality, something delicate, pressing, and undeniably genuine. He nodded instinctively. "It's all right," he reassured the guard. "She will remain. She's with me." In that moment, his whole existence subtly, yet permanently transformed. Charles remained motionless in the center of the lobby, the resonance of Ellie's words reverberating within him. The moment was shrouded in confusion, yet an undeniable instinct whispered that it was genuine. The image he held in his grasp validated it. There he stood, youthful and at ease, his arm encircling Julia's waist. She smiled at the camera, her hair tousled by the wind, and his expression, once foreign to him, now reflected a kind of closeness that made his heart constrict. That weekend lingered in his memory. They ventured to the coast without a particular purpose, rented a quaint cottage, and spent the nights engaged in conversations that meandered through a myriad of topics, both significant and trivial. It was among the final moments he allowed himself to immerse completely in another's reality. And then he departed. He glanced down at the small girl now standing silently beside him, clutching the strap of her backpack with one hand while rubbing her eye with the other. She appeared weary, not merely from dashing into his office, but with a weight of fatigue that no child should bear. Her gaze lifted to his, a blend of caution and hope shimmering within. She whispered your name to me, repeating it softly. She mentioned that you once held significance in her life. That word, once uttered, carried more significance than he anticipated. He carefully set the photo on the reception desk and knelt to meet Ellie's gaze. Where is your mom now? He inquired with great care. What transpired? Ellie shifted nervously, then retrieved a wrinkled note from her coat pocket. This was provided to me by the hospital. She collapsed at work and remained unresponsive. An ambulance was called. I found myself at school and then I lingered, yet no one arrived to collect me. Upon returning home, her words echoed in my mind. Charles grasped the paper from her hands and perused its contents. The document was a discharge summary from the emergency room, bearing Julia's signature and an urgent note hastily written at the bottom. If anything happens to me, find Charles Bennett. Only an address remained, devoid of any further details. It failed to clarify what she was experiencing, the severity of her condition, or who had been keeping an eye on Ellie during that time. And the most disappointing aspect was that she had seemingly placed her trust in him, a person she hadn't communicated with in years, expecting him to rise to the occasion. He rose to his feet and fixed his gaze on the guard, whose discomfort was now unmistakable. Have Elise clear my afternoon, Charles instructed, his tone steady yet authoritative. Please have the car brought around. The sentinel paused, uncertainty flickering in his eyes. Are you certain, sir? Indeed, Charles interjected, softly resting a hand on Ellie's shoulder. We are heading to the hospital. Ellie remained silent during the descent in the elevator. She remained near him, clutching her bear-shaped keychain tightly in both hands. Charles glanced at her more than once, trying to understand how he could have possibly missed this. Julia had been absent from his life for 6 years, during which she had nurtured a child, cared for her, safeguarded her, and never once made an attempt to connect. What is the reason behind this? Could it have been pride? Discomfort? Or had she merely presumed he wouldn't be concerned? As the vehicle arrived at the emergency entrance of St. Mary's Hospital, Charles assisted Ellie in exiting and guided her through the doors. The receptionist glanced up, her eyes widening in astonishment at the sight of him. He was used to that, his face occasionally appeared in the business news, but this wasn't a boardroom. He introduced himself, provided Julia's complete name, and paused as the woman typed away at her keyboard. This morning, she confirmed her admission. Hemorrhaging within the body. She is currently under observation. Currently, only family members are permitted to visit. Charles paused, uncertainty flickering in his mind. He was uncertain whether he possessed the authority to express it. But then Ellie stepped forward and murmured, "He is family." The receptionist hesitated for a moment, then slowly nodded and motioned toward the waiting area. "Please have a seat. A nurse will inform you once she is stable." Charles guided Ellie to a plastic chair and took a seat next to her. She nestled beside him, clutching her backpack, her legs tucked close to her chest. He gazed at her once more, truly observing. The tilt of her head, the curve of her mouth when she frowned, and the subtle, concentrated crease between her brows. All of it brought Julia to mind. For the first time in years, his mind was free from the burdens of quarterly targets, investor calls, and mergers. He found himself lost in thoughts of a woman he had once cherished, and the child he had never realized was his, now peacefully resting against him. Charles remained still in the waiting room, the sounds of hospital monitors and intercom announcements fading into the background, overshadowed by the heaviness of the child resting against him. Ellie had drifted off, her head nestled just beneath his shoulder, her petite frame curled in a manner that suggested she had experienced this before, waiting, fretting, and silently enduring. He wrapped his arms softly around her, uncertain whether it was to provide her solace or to seek his own. The stark white walls, the sharp smell of antiseptic, the rhythmic ticking of the clock on the distant wall, all served as reminders that this was no longer a mere interruption in his day. This was an action that could not be undone. It was an undeniable pull, one he couldn't escape, no matter how much he wished to. A nurse finally made her way over, her steps careful and a clipboard held tightly against her chest. She cast a fleeting look at Ellie before speaking softly to Charles. She mentioned that you're listed as the emergency contact. Ms. Davis is in a stable condition. She came to about 20 minutes ago. She remains fragile, yet clear-minded. Charles let out a breath he hadn't known he was holding. What transpired? The nurse paused, uncertainty flickering in her eyes. A history of untreated anemia exists. She fell to the ground at her workplace. She bled profusely before the paramedics reached the scene. We are currently administering transfusions, and she will be monitored overnight. She felt fortunate that her daughter remained calm. Her gaze darted momentarily to Ellie, who remained in slumber. The young girl maintained her composure, recalling your name and address with clarity. That certainly holds some significance. Charles inclined his head with a measured, deliberate gesture. The nurse guided him along the corridor, leaving another nurse to attend to Ellie. With each step toward the recovery room, he sensed the burden of past decisions pressing more heavily against his back. The last time he encountered Julia, there were no theatrical farewells, no weeping, merely a last argument and a silent acknowledgement that their paths were diverging. She felt disappointment, certainly, but she did not plead. He had believed that silence signified an end. At this moment, he understood that it had been something completely different. As he entered her room, the dim light cast a soft glow, revealing Julia's fragile form nestled in the hospital bed. Her complexion was fair, her hair tousled upon the pillow, yet her gaze remained unchanged, keen and unwavering and fearless. She gazed at him, her silence lingering in the air. For a brief instant, they examined one another as if attempting to encapsulate 6 years within a single look. I wasn't certain you'd show up, she finally admitted, her voice rough yet distinct. Ellie mentioned that she discovered you. I never expected her to recall the name. Charles approached the bed, his voice caught in his throat. She claimed I'm her father, he remarked at last, sounding more like a question than a declaration. Julia nodded slowly. She is 6 years old. I discovered I was expecting shortly after our separation. I refrained from calling you because I wasn't sure if you would be interested in knowing. You had already left. Her eyes held no blame towards him. They simply spoke the truth. I should have known, he murmured softly. I ought to have inquired. I ought to have. Julia gave a subtle shake of her head. Moving backward serves no purpose. You have arrived. That is what holds significance for her. In that fleeting moment, silence enveloped them both. So many gaps remained, and countless years awaited to be accounted for. Yet Charles sensed a weight within him, something unrefined and hurtful, yet undeniably true. He remarked on her incredible nature. Intelligent, fearless. She arrived at my office as if she had a purpose to fulfill. Julia offered a subtle smile, a hint of pride illuminating her weary face. She exhibits remarkable courage. She inherited that from me. Then, with a gentler touch, she observes others just as you do. Charles drew the chair nearer to the bed. What occurs next? He inquired. What is it that you require? Julia regarded him, not merely as a former affection or a bygone error, but as a man who was making an effort to be present at last. I require some time to recuperate at this moment. Ellie requires someone to escort her home and ensure she consumes a meal that goes beyond the confines of vending machine snacks. Charles rose to his feet and gave a nod. I am capable of accomplishing that. He moved toward the door, yet hesitated. I wish to be included in her life. I'm unsure about how to approach this task. However, I have a desire to acquire knowledge. If you would allow me to. Julia gazed at him for an extended moment, her face a mask of ambiguity. With a soft exhale, she remarked, then don't merely speak it. Demonstrate it. As he strolled back down the corridor in search of Ellie, Charles sensed the heaviness of that concluding sentence embed itself deep within him. It's not a challenge. An opportunity. A threshold he had yet to cross. And this time he had no plans to shut it. Charles made his way back to the waiting area, discovering Ellie still lost in slumber, nestled on the chair with her jacket draped over her like a cozy blanket, her small backpack held tightly against her chest as if it were a protective barrier. He settled beside her in silence, observing the gentle rhythm of her breath, captivated by the tranquility that enveloped her, even after all she had faced in the past day. He was astonished that she had managed to steer through a crisis that would leave most adults in disarray, relying solely on a name and a photograph. The strength emanated not merely from survival. It was evident that Julia had deeply embedded it within her. After a brief pause, Ellie began to awaken. Her eyes fluttered open, still hazy with slumber, and upon noticing him seated beside her, she neither startled nor questioned his presence. She just asked, "Is she all right?" Charles gave a deliberate nod. "She has awakened. She is receiving attentive care from the doctors. She requested that I drive you home and ensure you have a meal that's more satisfying than the hospital snacks." Ellie appeared to ponder that for a moment, then straightened up and rubbed her eyes. "Are you familiar with the process of making pancakes?" she inquired. He was taken aback by the question. He anticipated weeping or quietness, not demands for breakfast. It had been some time since he last made pancakes, he confessed. "I'm open to giving it a shot if you'll guide me through it." As she drove to her apartment, Ellie gazed out the window, serene yet composed. Her lack of fear towards him caught Charles off guard more than anything else. She regarded him as if he were familiar. Indeed, her presence exuded a certain effortless grace, as though she had instinctively concluded that he was meant to be a part of her realm. At a red light, he glanced over and inquired, "Do you want to discuss what transpired today?" Ellie gave a nonchalant shrug. "Not quite. Mother occasionally falls ill. This one was simply more disappointing." Her tone held no drama, merely the straightforward voice of a child who had mastered the art of navigating uncertainty. He nodded, allowing the silence to settle back in. Her apartment was cozy, tidy, and brimming with evidence of a life shaped by hard work. On the fridge, drawings clung to the surface, secured by an assortment of mismatched magnets. By the door, a pair of rain boots rested, and a couch, seemingly older than Ellie, exuded a sense of warmth and affection. He assisted her in unpacking her bag, discovered cereal in the cupboard along with milk that was still good, and successfully scrambled some eggs. She was determined to set the table, despite it being just the two of them, and then engaged him with questions between bites, inquiring about his age, the type of car he drove, and whether he had a fondness for dogs. Felt like a dream. She refrained from inquiring about his absence, at least for the moment, but he was aware that the question loomed on the horizon. At this moment, she was piecing together her understanding of him, exploring one small curiosity at a time. Following their lunch, Ellie retrieved a box of puzzles and beckoned him to join in the fun. They settled on the floor, meticulously aligning corners and edges, engaged in a serene yet collaborative effort. It transcended the mere challenge of the puzzle. It was a moment of reflection, a vast expanse of possibilities, a trial to see if he would remain. As the last piece fell into position, she beamed and remarked, "That was quicker than when I tackle it by myself." Charles experienced a comforting warmth radiating from his chest. "Everything becomes simpler with a helping hand," he responded. She nodded, reclining on her hands with a sense of ease. "My mother agrees with that as well." As the afternoon light danced through the windows, Charles assisted her in packing an overnight bag to take back to the hospital, including one of her cherished books and a small stuffed bear adorned with a frayed ribbon. He inquired whether she would like to return with him to visit her mother once more. After a moment of uncertainty, she gave a slight nod. "Just make sure you promise to hold my hand in the elevator. The beeping sounds are quite bothersome to me." He extended his hand in silence. She grasped it firmly and refused to release her hold. That evening, as they entered Julia's room once more, Ellie hurried to her mother's side and settled into the chair next to the bed. Initially, Charles observed from a distance, but Julia gestured for him to approach. She appeared weary yet more resilient, her complexion brighter, her gaze sharper. "You did well today," she murmured gently. He remained expressionless, yet her words found a place within him, filling a void he hadn't realized existed. "We managed all right," he remarked. He cast his gaze downward at Ellie, her hand entwined with Julia's fingers, while the other remained gently clasping his. He understood that this was not merely a single day of involvement. It marked the dawn of permanence. For the first time in years, he found himself content to be exactly where he was. The days that followed took a turn that Charles had not foreseen. What started as a solitary act of duty had evolved into something more profound, something he found impossible to categorize or plan for. Julia stayed in the hospital for observation, her condition gradually getting better, yet still needing rest. With no immediate family around and her dearest friend living far away, Charles took on the role of being there for Ellie, not just in a legal sense but also on an emotional level. To my astonishment, he accepted it without any hesitation. He welcomed it with a subtle resolve, even though every aspect felt unfamiliar and precarious. Ellie had resumed her familiar daily rhythm of attending school, but this time it was Charles who came to collect her. On that initial morning, he showed up 10 minutes ahead of time, feeling uncertain about his position and the words to express. He lingered by the gate, observing fellow parents engaging in conversation, exchanging greetings with the ease of familiarity. He sensed his alienation, a stranger cloaked in bewilderment, adorned with a lavish coat and gleaming shoes. But then Ellie caught sight of him from across the playground, dashed toward him with her backpack swaying behind her, and beamed as if his presence was the most ordinary thing imaginable. That smile anchored him more profoundly than any conference room ever could. Returning to Julia's apartment, he started to adjust to the new cadence of life alongside a child. Mornings unfolded with cereal spills, elusive shoes, and lively discussions about the ideal cartoon to grace the background. Evenings unfolded at a gentle pace, filled with homework that puzzled him yet he endeavored to assist, uncomplicated dinners crafted together, where laughter often outshone precision, and tales shared aloud in animated voices that sent Ellie into fits of giggles until she drifted off, her cheek resting against his arm. The elegance of the routine transformed into something revered. Every moment woven into his day revealed a clarity he never realized he required. In the quiet of the night, after Ellie had drifted off to sleep, Charles would settle into the living room, sifting through emails, though he found himself responding to fewer and fewer. He hesitated over messages from board members or investors, occasionally crafting replies only to erase them. For the first time in his life, the tasks at hand seemed to lack a pressing urgency. The pressing concerns revolved around whether Ellie had packed her lunch for school, if Julia's chart indicated any progress, or if Ellie's beloved stuffed bear, which she now required Charles to tuck in at night, had been adequately fluffed. Every evening after dinner, he made his way to Julia's, often accompanied by Ellie, unless she was feeling too fatigued. With every visit, the discomfort seemed to fade away. Julia observed him intently during those moments, not merely out of curiosity but with a measured sense of trust. Initially, their discussions revolved around everyday matters: Ellie's bedtime, medications, bills, but gradually the topics began to meander. She inquired about his company, and he candidly shared the challenges he faced in maintaining focus. He inquired about her intentions for when she returned home, and she confessed that she hadn't considered anything beyond the immediate future. Their words carried no pressure, no burden of having to articulate the evolving nature of their connection. Yet it was evolving into something more. It was evident. One evening, as Charles and Ellie exited the hospital, she instinctively reached for his hand. As they strolled toward the car, she remarked, "Mom says I'm brave, but I believe you're discovering your own courage as well." He paused in his stride, momentarily disarmed by the straightforwardness of her words. He gently squeezed her hand and offered a nod. "Your perspective seems valid to me." She smiled, gently swaying his hand, as though that resolved everything entirely. In the quiet of the apartment, with Ellie peacefully asleep and the dishes put away, Charles lingered in the soft glow of the kitchen light, reflecting on all he had constructed in his life, now feeling like a distant memory. His penthouse, his board meetings, his title, all of it paled in comparison to the quiet peace of brushing Ellie's hair back before bed, or the half-smile Julia gave him whenever he made her laugh. He understood he hadn't merely entered their realm. He had been embraced by it. Now, he found it impossible to envision turning his back. The sixth morning dawned under a veil of rain. A rhythmic, persistent sound that lightly tapped against the windows of Julia's apartment, transforming the outside world into a softer, more tranquil scene. Within the confines of the living room, the air was rich with the aroma of cinnamon toast, while the delightful sound of Ellie's feet danced across the tile patterns, as she imagined they were stepping stones over a sea of lava. Charles stood at the kitchen counter, pouring orange juice, clad in a wrinkled white shirt and mismatched socks. For the first time in his adult life, he felt a sense of freedom in his disheveled appearance. He was starting to realize that there was a certain strength in being authentic rather than refined. As Ellie settled into her seat at the table, she inquired about the possibility of visiting her mother once more after school. Charles agreed immediately without a moment's pause. He had already made arrangements to collect her and head directly to the hospital, even prior to her request. The way Ellie checked her backpack twice before leaving, the way she tucked her small sketchbook inside to show her mom a new drawing, it was evident she had structured her week around those brief hospital visits. He realized that consistency held greater value than perfection, and that showing up each day was far more significant than any apology could convey. Once he had dropped Ellie off at school, Charles lingered in his car, hands resting on the wheel, lost in thoughts of Julia. Her condition had improved sufficiently that the doctors anticipated she would be released in a few days. The news was expected to bring comfort, yet it ignited a tempest of doubt within him. He understood she would require support, genuine, continuous support, not merely transportation to appointments or meals warmed up from frozen trays. She would require rest, assistance, and above all, a person she could depend on unconditionally. He had never occupied that role before, yet he desired to exist in the present moment. Later that day, after collecting Ellie and securing her favorite cookies from a nearby bakery, they reached the hospital just as the sun began to set. Julia sat up in bed as they entered, her complexion pale yet her smile bright. Her hair was freshly washed and neatly combed back, and while her figure still appeared delicate beneath the hospital blanket, a hint of color had returned to her cheeks. Ellie climbed onto the edge of the bed and pulled out her sketchbook, talking so quickly about her school day that the words nearly tripped over each other. Julia absorbed the moment, her hand delicately placed on her daughter's knee, nodding and sharing soft laughter, while occasionally casting a glance at Charles filled with a subtle appreciation. As Ellie dashed down the corridor with a nurse to fetch a juice box, Charles settled into the chair next to Julia's bed. Silence enveloped them for a few moments. She then faced him and remarked, "You've exceeded my expectations." Her voice carried a sense of sincerity, devoid of blame. "You had no obligation to us. You were completely unaware of her existence." Charles gazed at her, unwavering and assured. "Perhaps I didn't have any obligations to you back then," he stated thoughtfully. "However, I certainly do at this moment. And it's not due to any sense of guilt. Being with her and helping you is the only thing that has felt right in years." Julia observed him intently, her face a mask of mystery. "I don't know how to reconstruct something that was never truly there," she murmured gently. "I aim to avoid any confusion for both her and myself. I refuse to act as if time has stood still." "We cannot change the past," Charles responded. "Perhaps we can create something fresh. If you allow me to." He anticipated opposition, a barrier to rise, yet Julia merely sighed and reclined her head against the pillow. "It's not merely about granting you permission. It revolves around having faith in you, not solely during moments of ease, but also in times of difficulty." He nodded with a measured deliberation. "From this day forward, I will demonstrate my sincerity to you, day in and day out." At that moment, Ellie burst back into the room, a juice box clutched in her hand, her cheeks glowing with enthusiasm. She settled into the chair between them and declared, "Mom says I can show you how to braid hair." Charles blinked in astonishment, while Julia let out a joyful laugh. "Your styling skills might benefit from a bit of refinement." Charles lifted his hands high. "That seems reasonable. I will embrace the training." As they departed from the hospital that evening, Ellie inquired whether he would still be present when her mother returned home. He responded instantly, "I will." As she intertwined her fingers with his while they navigated the parking lot, he experienced that familiar, profound change within himself once more. The subtle force that went unnoticed, yet transformed everything. 3 days later, Julia left the hospital. The morning unfolded in a brilliant display of sunlight, a serene juxtaposition to the turmoil that had defined the previous week. Charles ensured that every detail in the apartment was attended to. Fresh sheets adorned the bed, groceries filled the fridge, and medications were collected and arranged meticulously in a pill organizer. He took it upon himself to address the flickering light in the hallway, a detail Julia had seemingly overlooked for months. He had no intention of winning her admiration. He just wished for her to return home and find a sense of peace. It wasn't as if she needed to revert to a state of survival. As Charles arrived home with Julia, Ellie stood patiently at the front door, anticipation evident in her posture. The young girl danced on her toes, brimming with excitement, adorned with a crown crafted from paper and glue, which she proudly declared was meant to greet her queen. As the door creaked open and Julia entered, moving at a leisurely pace yet beaming with joy, Ellie dashed forward to embrace her, her tiny arms encircling Julia's waist with tenderness. Julia shut her eyes and embraced her daughter tightly, her face relaxing in a manner Charles had never witnessed before. The reunion unfolded in a serene manner, lacking in theatrics, yet brimming with the unexpressed emotions they had previously kept at bay. Julia moved deliberately through the apartment, rediscovering her surroundings, and appeared taken aback by how it had transformed into something beyond just a place to rest. Subtle alterations caught the eye, blankets arranged in a new way, dishes placed with intention, and Ellie's drawings elegantly displayed in modest frames from the dollar store. "Did you really accomplish all of this?" she inquired, casting a sidelong glance at Charles. He nodded, a hint of shyness in his demeanor. "I thought it best for you to return to a peaceful environment." Her silence spoke volumes, and the glance she cast his way conveyed all the gratitude she felt. That initial evening felt unique. Charles lingered into the evening, assisting Julia in finding her footing, while Ellie was determined to prepare dinner. For her, dinner consisted of peanut butter sandwiches meticulously shaped like stars, accompanied by crisp carrot sticks and juice poured with utmost care using both hands. At the table, 3 individuals who had once been strangers now shared a moment that felt both fragile and authentic. There were pauses, yet each one felt perfectly at ease. It seemed as though the act of breathing had transformed into a simpler endeavor for each of them, as if an unseen force had gently guided them into harmony without any effort required. Later that evening, Charles kindly volunteered to read Ellie her bedtime story, allowing Julia the chance to enjoy her first proper shower in days. Ellie selected a tale of an enchanting forest and nestled into bed, her beloved stuffed bear cradled under one arm. While he immersed himself in the text, she interjected with inquiries, many of which strayed from the narrative, yet he responded to each with patience. As the final page turned, she looked at him and asked, "Will you be here tomorrow as well?" He paused for a brief moment. He responded, "If your mom is all right with it." She nodded, content with the outcome. "It seems she has feelings for you as well." Then she reached up and caressed his cheek with a touch that was open and full of trust. "You're a good reader," she remarked, then nestled into her pillow and let her eyelids drift shut. Charles lingered in silence, observing her rhythmic breaths, contemplating the peculiar intensity of falling in love so swiftly and profoundly that it stirred a sense of fear within him. Yet he remained close. He remained by her side until her breathing became calm and even. As he emerged from Ellie's room, Julia occupied the couch, clad in new pajamas, her hair still moist, cradling a cup of tea in her hands. She appeared rejuvenated, yet cautious. Charles approached her silently, without a word of inquiry. They lingered in quietude once more, yet it was a stillness that beckoned truth. At last, she found her voice. "You've transformed. You pay closer attention. You no longer seem to gaze beyond the present as you once did." Charles gazed at his hands, lost in thought. "It took significant losses for me to understand what truly holds value. Yet, despite having it all, an emptiness lingered within me. At this moment I find myself without it." Julia observed him intently for a moment, then lifted her cup to take a sip of her tea. "I'm uncertain about what this connection is between us. I'm not prepared to label it just yet. However, I am aware that Ellie requires your presence. I also require your presence, in a manner I hadn't anticipated." Charles locked his gaze with hers. "Let's take our time before assigning a name to it. Let's simply create it, step by step." She gave a slow nod. "Understood." That evening, Charles chose not to return to his penthouse. He lay on the couch, a blanket draped over him, while Ellie's stuffed bear perched on the coffee table, watching over him like a quiet sentinel. As dawn broke, the aroma of toast mingled with the sound of laughter drifting from the kitchen, awakening him to a longing he hadn't realized he possessed. A life that, while not flawless, finally embraced the essence of home. A month went by, and life found a cadence that none had anticipated, yet all welcomed with silent acceptance. Charles no longer kept his phone on during dinner. He ceased the habit of checking emails prior to going to sleep. His adolescent years had adapted to his diminished presence at work, and while a few raised eyebrows at his altered focus, the majority recognized that a transformation had taken place within him, and not in a sensational, theatrical manner, but in the way an individual starts to engage with their life rather than hurriedly moving through it. He continued to engage in his work, making decisions and taking calls, yet his hours were reduced, his boundaries strengthened, and his evenings dedicated to pursuits far more significant than meetings. Julia's recovery unfolded with a steady rhythm. Life surged back into her cheeks, her steps became more assured, and she began to stroll with Ellie after school. She and Charles frequently found themselves side by side at the window, observing Ellie as she danced along the sidewalk, lost in her own world of chatter, just as children do when they are enveloped in a sense of security. Occasionally, Julia would steal a glance at Charles, her subtle smile appearing only when she believed he was unaware, and at times he managed to seize it regardless. They refrained from discussing their identities or potential futures, as there was a certain reverence in the organic way events were progressing without definitions. They embraced the present, mindful of preserving the delicate trust that had been painstakingly restored over time. On a leisurely Saturday afternoon, they strolled through the park side by side. Ellie was determined to have a picnic, carefully packing sandwiches she had a hand in making and pouring lemonade into an assortment of mismatched cups. She also had her sketchbook with her, and midway through lunch, she passed Charles a drawing. It revealed 3 figures once more, this time with greater clarity. A towering figure, a lady adorned in crimson, and a young girl grasping their hands. Above them, in a shaky script, were the words. Charles blinked hard, gazing at the paper longer than he needed to. Julia extended her hand and softly clasped his beneath the blanket. It was an ordinary moment, yet to him it carried immense significance. As the sun started its descent, painting the sky with golden hues that filtered through the trees, Ellie darted off in pursuit of a butterfly. Julia and Charles lingered on the blanket, the quietness enveloping them, rich with unexpressed thoughts. At last, she rested her head against his shoulder. It was the first time she had reached out to him in that way since the hospital. There will be no discussion, no alert. It was a serene intimacy that conveyed deeper meaning than any words ever could. He gently covered her hand with his. Nothing guaranteed, no grand statements, merely being here. Dedication without stress. He would remain. He had already done so. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Ellie clasped their hands tightly while they strolled home together. She gazed at Charles and inquired, "Do you believe we'll remain this way forever?" He gazed down at her, a gentle smile gracing his lips. He expressed his hope, saying so. I will strive to ensure that happens. She appeared pleased with that response, bounding forward once more. Upon arriving home, Ellie dashed to her room to slip into her pajamas, while Julia and Charles tidied up the remaining picnic remnants. In the kitchen, enveloped by remnants and the lingering aroma of peanut butter and lemonade, she faced him and remarked, I don't believe I could have accomplished this without you. He took his time before responding. Then he remarked, perhaps you could have. Yet, I appreciate that you were spared from that experience. With a gentle nod and her eyes shimmering, she leaned in to place a soft kiss on his cheek. As the night deepened and Ellie drifted into slumber, the apartment fell into a serene hush. Charles found himself standing in the hallway, poised between her bedroom and the living room. He surveyed the surroundings, taking in the scattered toys on the floor, the laundry draped carelessly over the couch, the grocery list affixed to the fridge, and experienced a sense of tranquility he never realized could exist. It lacked flair and wasn't flawless. It wasn't the type of achievement that could be quantified by figures or accolades. Yet it was genuine, and it belonged to him. He no longer sought the title, the corner office, or the relentless pursuit. What he sought was present. Within these walls, alongside them, a realm shaped not by the remnants of his past, but by the choices he embraced in the present. Ultimately, this narrative isn't centered on wealth or dramatic turns. It's about subtle redemption, the kind that arrives not with fanfare but through genuine existence. What resonated deeply with me was how Charles didn't rely on wealth or extravagant acts to make a difference, but rather by being present, enduring discomfort, and embracing the transformative power of connection. He didn't seek to recover what once was. He crafted something completely original. And maybe that's the most profound form of healing, not in wiping away the past errors, but in the daily decision to rise above them.